Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a wandering adventurer who left decades of grown-up life on the East Coast at age 60 to return to the mountains, beaches, and rain of her soul's home in the Pacific Northwest. She blogs about her adventures from coffee shops, her father's desk, national park lodges, her tent, wherever she feels cozy. She writes to learn about who she is in the world and within herself, and shares it with readers who might find themselves in places they never expected to be. She lives with her cat in Washington, the real one. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Gretchen Staebler.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm thrilled to be here.
Gretchen, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, the short answer is, though I was a voracious reader, I never aspired to be an author or even a writer, really. Although I liked to write, and research papers in school were my favorite assignment. I journaled sporadically until around the age of 40, when I became more consistent. But it wasn't until around 50 that I started thinking, if I had it to do over again, I would be a writer. I would take more English classes, get an MFA, be Jodi Picoult and churn out a novel every year or two. But eventually I realized that I didn't have to travel back to the past or be Jodi to learn how to write better. So I started reading books about writing and journaling more. And at 57, I took my first class. It was a continuing education class at one of the local colleges. And the last night of the class, the teacher mentioned blogging as a way to get your writing out into the world. And it was 2009, and I'm not sure I'd ever even read a blog post, but it really struck a chord with me that here was a way to write publicly and to do it regularly, without the daunting task of perfecting it and finding a place to publish it and being rejected and finding another place. So it was just the best imaginable practice for me. So I started a blog about life lessons from the garden I was restoring at the house that I just bought. And I wrote it weekly for 3 years and gathered a following. And then I left the garden and moved across the country to take care of my mom. I started a new blog called Daughter on Duty, learning from followers that there was a hunger for the topic of family caregiving. Then I splurged on a week-long writing retreat and a memoir writing retreat. And from that blog and that retreat, my book was born. And it was published in October, this past October, 4 months after my 70th birthday.
Well, that was a great birthday, and I am interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who've written their first book, and they're doing beautiful work. So I think we can write the rest of our lives.
We can indeed.
Well, the topic of your book, caregiving, is very important to all of us now. You know, we've been called the sandwich generation. A lot of people caught between younger children and elderly parents. But you put the word reluctant, and your book trailer made me so emotional. I think that the elderly, especially our parents, are such a poignant subject, and especially more so now that I am in that age bracket myself. And I always wonder how my own children will handle these issues. So tell us more about your reluctant caregiving that led to this book.
Well, I'd wanted to come back to the Pacific Northwest really since I left 36 years earlier. And my sister had one of my sisters had made her own cross-country trek back from the East Coast to the West Coast, and had been lived with my mom for 5 years, and then for 5 more years was living close by, and they were kind of taking care of each other. When I came, my mother was 96, and up until that point, she really didn't need too much. She'd stopped driving, so she needed transportation to get to out-of-town doctor's appointments and that kind of thing. But she was starting to decline, and it felt like my sister, it wasn't fair for her to do it all. And I wanted to come back. So it seemed like a good opportunity. I could live with my mom for a year. I committed to a year living with her, and we'd get this family home that she'd lived in for 50 years and saved lots and lots of stuff in. We'd get it cleaned out and put it on the market and find a new place for her to live. And then I'd go back to my own life. And she'd been living alone since my dad died for almost 20 years. So she was pretty settled and pretty stuck also. And I thought, that would be easy. And maybe I could improve my relationship with her. We'd been distant for a long time, at least geographically. So a year went by, and another year, and you can learn the why from the book, but I ended up being with her for 4.5 years, and then for another 18 months when she went to assisted living finally. And I'm still here in the house, and it's still not cleaned out. So
wow.
That was the reluctant part. It was much longer than I anticipated it being or wanted it to be.
Wow. Well, you certainly have good genes. Your mother lived to be over 100?
Almost 102. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Both sides of the family, except for my dad. Long lives.
That's wonderful. Well, once you wrote this book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to use a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
Well, the people in my writing retreat, and I returned to this retreat for 4 more alumni sessions, some of the same people each time and some new people. So they were hearing my story and hearing me reading new bits that I'd written from it, and it was largely taken from my blog posts. So I didn't really have confidence in myself to look for a traditional publisher, nor did I really have the bandwidth while living with my mother to pursue how that might happen, and even after she died and I was getting ready to do something with it, I just couldn't see myself trying to find a traditional publisher and writing all the stuff you have to write for that, the pitch letters, and learn how to do that. And it's like, so I thought I would self-publish it. Like, that's all I really felt like I was capable of doing. Like, who am I to write a book and publish a book? But the women in my retreats convinced me that I could do more than that. And about that time, I discovered She Writes Press, which coincidentally or serendipitously was born the same year I moved across the country in 2012. So I pursued that, and I sent my manuscript in for an assessment, which is not a requirement, but I still didn't have confidence that it was any good. And I didn't want to pursue something that wasn't worth pursuing. So I got positive response from that and suggestions on how to improve it. And they accepted my book for publication. And so that's what I did, a hybrid press. So it's got a lot of the same advantages of a traditional publisher with traditional distribution and support and professional covers and interior design. So a lot of things that you don't get with self-publishing, and much less lonely as well.
Well, that's what I hear is the strength of She Writes Press, and they're very well respected in the industry, is the community of women writers that they bring together, and you feed off each other.
Right. There are Facebook groups, one for She Writes authors and one that's just my cohort secret Facebook groups. And the cohort group especially has just been so supportive, and we get good ideas and find out what's going on behind the scenes that we may not have heard about, and new places to pitch to, and places like Authors Over 50. That's where I learned about you, was from other She Writes authors who have been on your show. And so, yeah, it's been really great. I'm not sure how I would have done it without them.
Well, Gretchen, do you have another book in you? Are you still writing?
There's not time to write right now. I'm a hiker, and I have 2 grandchildren, and who are close by, 2 who are far away. But the family lived with me through the pandemic, and it's so that I could help with Zoom school. So that took so much time that there just really hasn't been much writing time. But during the pandemic, I did do a family history book based on excerpts that I did of 1,600 letters that my dad and his family and my mother wrote to each other during World War II. And it was a huge tome with some relevant history of the war and what was going on in this country during that time. So that was a big project, and very satisfying. And I did it for my family, and some other people, friends, bought it as well. But I have also a lot of stories that my dad and his family wrote about growing up on a farm in Michigan in the early 1900s. And I really want to do something with that. And again, it will probably be for family. I don't think I have another widely distributed published book in me, but who knows? I have thought about making the letters book into something marketable. So that's a possibility.
I think so, because although it's a wonderful legacy for your family, I've heard of so many people using diary entries and, letters and things like that to kick off their books and to explore that history in their families. And it could certainly be another great book for you.
Could be. We'll see.
Tell us more about the publishing journey with She Writes. Were there challenges? Did you find any publicity that worked or that didn't work?
I chose to be my own publicist. Publishing with a hybrid press is extremely expensive. And I was prepared for some expense, but it's been far more than I imagined. And publicists are very expensive. So I decided I could do that myself. And thank goodness for the internet. I don't know how anybody publishes a book without the internet. But it's full of free or inexpensive webinars and blogs about publishing and marketing a book. And I devoured them. And that was really helpful. I think I've done okay. I'm not sure what a publicist could have done, paid publicists that I haven't done, some things for sure. But the best thing that I did was to gather a street team, I called it. So they were friends who liked to read from across the country, 15 people, I think. And they helped me get the word out. So I would make graphics and they would post them on their social media and tell friends and ask their library to carry it. And anything I asked, they would do. So I think that was the best thing that I did. And I was convinced from the beginning that this was a book that could travel by word of mouth. I don't think that's true of all books, but there are more than 52 million family caregivers in America right now. Americans caring for an adult family member and mostly unpaid. And they're everywhere. It's like when you're pregnant, everybody's pregnant when and when you become a caregiver, or especially when you're a caregiver survivor and it's behind you and you can come out from your hole, everybody's caregiving. So and I think it has or is in the process of spreading in that way. People are just telling other people who are telling other people who are telling other people.
I find that to be very helpful, especially if you have such a niche market that you have, because, like you said, there's so many. But, if you could reach out to those families who are going through this in nursing homes or in their own homes with these organizations that help care for parents, any way to get that book into other families' hands is going to be so important to them and for you.
Yes, yes.
I know you mentioned a writing group. Are there any specific books or seminars or writing retreats or groups that you can share that improved your writing journey?
Well, there were many books, but I think the retreats were the best thing. And it was money well spent going to these retreats, and they weren't cheap, but they were both spiritually, emotionally nurturing. And in my case, they cooked for me, and I was a cook for my mother, and she was very particular, and she had some digestive issues. Really, was other than eyes and ears, her only health issue were digestive issues. So I would go to these retreats and somebody else would cook for me for 5 to 7 days. And everything that they cooked were things my mother couldn't eat. So I didn't eat. So it was just like the best money ever spent in the history of the world. So, but hearing other people read their work and then critiquing it and the support was all just so helpful in helping me be a better writer. Listening to their writing and what people said about it helped me be a better writer too. And having that dedicated time to sit down with your work and write. Blocking helped too, I would say.
I have found that writing retreats are so important because they do take us out of our mundane everyday routine, feeding the dogs, feeding a husband, and taking care of things around the house. Because if you're trying to write in your own environment, sometimes you think of everything else you can do besides write. And I love going to those writing retreats. Some have a class in the morning and then you write all afternoon. You come back together and share your work at night. And those are the ones that I find particularly helpful.
Yes, indeed.
What about the editing process? How did you manage the editing?
Well, she writes, you don't have to have an editor from She Writes, but I did use one of their editors who was vetted by them. So I had the assessment, then I had a developmental edit, then I had a copy edit, then I had the proofread. And I read it many times. I also had beta readers. So I had 7 people, I think, who read my book from cover to cover and made suggestions. And it was actually the beta readers' suggestions that completely changed the beginning of my book. So I deleted, for the most part, the first 2 chapters and started with the 3rd chapter on their suggestion. And I really never would have thought about it. Had to kill a lot of darlings. There were some parts of those chapters I did keep, but other parts that I did not. But it made it so much better. And yeah, I wouldn't have thought of it. And now I have a lot of those deleted scenes from the whole book. I had to cut tens of thousands of words. It was too long. And so a lot of my favorites of the stories that I cut are on my website now and being added. Every month I add another one. So you can see some of the backstory and the stories that didn't make it into the book. But the advice from She Writes was, if it doesn't serve your story or the arc of your story, then it needs to go. And if it's just another story that was just like a previous story, like in my case, my mother's eating habits or her hospital visits, just because it happened doesn't mean it has to be in the book, was the word they gave me. And that was very true. So
I'm always interested when people write memoir, how do you choose the length of time that you're actually going to delve into? What length of time did you have in your book?
Well, it was kind of easy in my case because it was a book about caring for my mom, and there was a beginning and an end. And I did decide, though, and this is a little bit about why I chose to write this book. I have long loved memoir, but when I started doing this, I started devouring memoirs written by caregivers, and there are quite a few of them. But they were all written after the caregiving was over, which is actually how you're supposed to write memoir. After the event, maybe even long after the event. So you have the benefit of the look back and can see how it changed you and where it went. But I wanted a book that told me how to get through the day. I didn't really care about how I would look back on this 10 years after it was over, or 5 years after it was over. I wanted to know what to do today when I was absolutely going out of my mind. So I decided that I would write the book that I wanted to read. So the book is written in real time. And my situation was unique too, because I was living with my mom. She was not living in my house even. I was living in her house, was a different story, although the days are similar to anybody's caregiving story. But when she finally moved to assisted living, it felt like that was not so much my unique story. That was more of the usual kind of caregiving. And I did continue to caregive her. My sister and I, either one of us or both of us saw her pretty much every day for the 18 months that she lived there. So we were still looking after her and taking care of her, but my story felt like it was over. So those most of that last 18 months and her actual death are just the epilogue of the book. So it was 6.5, 7 years that are in the book.
Wow, that's a lot of caregiving, Gretchen.
It was a long damn time.
I bet it was. Bless her and bless you. Tell us a little bit about the passages you've brought to share today, and then read from your book so we can hear your tone and voice.
Okay, thank you. I've chosen an excerpt that isn't a funny dialogue. There's a lot of funny stuff in the book, as well as poignancy. Because if you can't laugh at the absurdity that's a product of caregiving, you'll cry all the time. So this one depicts the dichotomy of emotions of the family caregiver, and we can move between extreme frustration and deep tenderness in either direction in a very short space of time. So that's what I've chosen to read. And this event took place in January of my first year with my mom, so about 6 months into living with her. Some days I feel myself turning and spiraling back toward the center of the labyrinth, falling into the patterns of this stranger with whom I am living, fearing I will become grouchy and pessimistic too. I go to the writing corner in the back of my father's workshop and sit in my favorite red leather armchair. I am infused with his presence as I sit drinking in his optimism, his humor, his zest for life, wishing he were the one I was here with. I will not become my mother, I promise myself. I will find the labyrinth's exit. I randomly find myself realizing I have nearly forgotten I used to have another life, a life in which I had a responsible job, where people counted on and appreciated me. I forget I had friends who loved me and a home of my own in which to bring them together, preparing a meal of my choosing that they raved about. Just as random are days I accept that I again occupy the room where I slept and diagrammed sentences and studied the periodic table as a teenager. I've had some good moments lately when I feel kind and patient toward Mama. These are the times I sense I will get beyond the hard stuff and know I was a good daughter who enhanced the quality of the end of my mother's life. But the good moments are sprinkled sparsely among the days and moments I think I can't do this anymore, and I made a terrible mistake moving back here. I want to go home, except I am home. I don't want to repeat myself, trying alternate words to make Mama understand what I am saying. I don't want to tell her what's on her dinner plate that she can't see, and watch her chase a bit of chicken around with her fork and then bring it empty to her mouth, making my heart break for her. I don't want to stop after every other sentence when I read to her to explain what she can't follow or to repeat a non-essential word. I want her to rejoice in what she can do instead of verbalizing the constant depression about what she can't that pulls me into the depths with her. I want her to go to sleep without hearing her breathing over the buzzing baby monitor by my bed. Tonight, I want to sit on the sofa with my pizza and wine to watch the Golden Globes and not feel guilty that Mama is behind me eating alone at the table. I want her not to choose the moment Jodie Foster is speaking to join me in the living room to tell me she didn't call Michelle, her part-time caregiver, about new scheduling options this afternoon while I was away, because she couldn't remember why she was supposed to call. I especially want her not to distract me while Jodie is poignantly talking about her mother who has dementia, hoping her mother is still there, somewhere behind her blue eyes, and will magically know in her soul that she is loved if Jodie tells her 3 times in a row. I love you, I tell Mama. I'm glad I'm here with you. I love you too, she says. Tears well in her eyes and mine.
Wow. Gretchen, that is so honest and so raw and so real.
Thank you.
You captured that beautifully.
Thank you.
What does your family think of this memoir? You know, sometimes memoirs can be touchy subjects in families.
I think they're really proud of me. They've done a lot to promote the book too. And my daughter, who lives nearby, has spread it around to all her friends. And my son, actually, I haven't heard from my son about it, but his wife said that she laughed and cried all the way through it, and she loved it. So, and my 8-year-old grandson wanted his own copy, so he got one for Christmas inscribed to him. that was sweet. So, yeah, I think they're proud of me. I hope my parents are. So. I think they probably are, but I don't put either my mother or myself in very good light a lot of the times. And that was the thing about writing the book in real time was I didn't go back and sugarcoat how I came across. So I don't look like a very good person sometimes.
I think that's why it's such an important work, because those of us who sugarcoat make other caregivers feel like they're the only ones who are having those emotions. So I think the fact that you told the truth is so much more vital.
Thank you. And I think I thought at the time that a lot of those memoirs who wrote about their experience were either lying or they forgot. And I can see now that forgetting is a big part of it. Again, not to belabor the pregnancy and delivery story metaphor, but you forget how hard labor is as soon as it's over and you've got that baby in your arms. And I think that's what would have happened if I had waited till after this story. I would have had a hard time being honest. I would have I already see my mother for who she was, in her goodness of who she was, that I couldn't see at the time. So yeah, so I thought either I'm the only one who's going through this, or people like me just don't write about it or say anything about it. They just keep quiet. So it's out there.
Well, it's such a gift to the world, I think. And I think what a gift to your mother. How many of us have been able to live with a parent for that length of time and take care of them? I think that's such a gift to her, and it's a gift to you to not overuse the word closure, but to get to know your mother more intimately, sometimes more than you ever wanted to, but that's certainly a gift for the rest of your life as well.
I think so. Yes. Thank you.
Well, as always, our very last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite a unique group. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
If there's a story burning inside of you, write it. And you can write short essays, you can write a blog, you can write a book. But my advice would be to write to the story, not toward publication. And when it's done, you may decide to seek publication, or it may be a legacy story and just share it with your family. And that's very important, legacy stories to pass on through the generations, what it was like to live in our times. Or you may find that all you needed to be complete was just to write it down. But there's no expiration date on creativity. So just do it. And I want to share one story about one of my ancestors who crossed the country in a covered wagon in the mid 1800s and settled not too far from where my parents came 100 years later, and where I live now. She was very involved with the Native Americans, taught them English, learned their language. The Indian Wars happened in the Oregon Territory then. She eventually, with her husband, continued to move up north and eventually founded a town near the border of Washington and Canada. And in her 90s, she wrote and published a book about her experiences based on her journals. And you can still find it on Amazon. So 90 is not too late to write your story. Just do it.
Well, your family is certainly full of wonderful women and strong women and independent women. And I just appreciate you being with us so much today. And we're excited to now say that you are one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia. I'm so pleased to have been here with you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.